Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like New Mutants, The Wilds, and Batgirls, a story over in Future State, The Next Batman. It's Vita Ayala. Thanks for coming on, Vita.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited to be back.
I just want to say really quick, we talked about this before, but I do kind of love this new era of video chat being like this wider accepted thing because... when you're just doing audio, spoiler alert, not even a spoiler, Vita and I are talking on video. And the nice thing is I can, you have visual cues to talking that you don't normally get in audio only. It's really nice.
It is really nice. I also, I don't know what kind of executive dysfunction that I have, but it is very hard for me to pay full attention to one thing. And so seeing you while we're talking, I can hear you better. That sounds crazy, I know. But it's really hard for me to understand words if I can't see like a mouth moving or read a subtitle or something like that. So this is great.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I totally get that because it just, I don't know, it gives you more things to lock onto. I'm one of those weird people who, I don't know if this is weird, but I've always been I'm like my cat Kai, who is like obsessed with like eye contact. And I don't know, I always just feel like I like to look at a person when I'm talking to them. Like, even though my camera over here is like, I'm not actually looking at you. I'm looking at you on my screen, which is like a weird combination. But, I'm curious, like, do you feel during all of this that the advent or like, I guess like the acceptance of video chat and like a wider scale has made collaboration at a distance a little bit easier for you?
Yes. And with a caveat. So I'm not good at eye contact. I get really nervous. Like, I'm just like, I barely even look my wife in the eye. I'm just like, but your camera setup is like perfect because it's like, you're clearly interacting with me. I can see you, all that stuff. And one thing that I do like about video chats is that it puts your picture up. Mm-hmm. And so normally, this is just how primates work. You end up looking at yourself more than anything else. Not on Skype because it's so small, but like Zoom is the primary video chat that everyone wants to use. And so it's like, everyone's not looking directly at the camera. That's good. they're looking at themselves.
They're trying to make sure that their hair doesn't look weird or something.
Yeah. Before I cut off all my hair, like it was a problem. I was like, oh no, I have to figure out what I'm doing. But now I'm like, I don't care.
See, I don't have that solution. My problem is I've tried this. My friend and I went to a hat shop and tried this. I have tried on hundreds of varieties of hats, and I look stupid in all of them. I don't know why. It's ridiculous. There's no hat in existence that doesn't make my head look like this giant globe.
You have really great hair, so I feel like that's the trade-off.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. I appreciate that. But, as much as I would love to talk about my hair, we're here to mostly talk about the world of the X-Men today. And I want to... we're going to take it back. I'm sure you've recounted this like a million times since you've started working in the X office. But I want to start with your X-Men origin story because like everyone has their first love. Actually, I remember I talked to somebody who worked on the X books who suggested that the comics they end up wanting to write for the X office are often influenced by what they loved when they first came into the X-Men. What's the story for you?
That's probably trackable for almost everyone. I kind of agree with that. I won't tell my comic origin story again because I think I told it last time I was here. But TLDR, X-Men was one of the first comics that I physically picked up as a kid. Mm-hmm. It was like on the spinner rack, and on the cover of this particular issue was Storm and Bishop. And I couldn't read at the time, but I would flip through and just look at these people that look like me. And then the cartoon came on, and to me that was like my biggest entry point into wanting to know more about the comics. Just having the first comic was kind of like, oh, this is cool. But I didn't really realize that they were like there were stories, long form stories. Cause you're a kid.
Yeah.
You'll just read whatever anyone puts in front of you. It doesn't matter what the number is. So you're used to being confused. But when I saw the cartoon, I was like, oh, there's like a storyline. There's like a follow through. And then from there I was lucky in that I grew up in New York City around a couple of different comic shops. So I would kind of like, I found some old trades, like Dark Phoenix, of course, and some other stuff. And I was just like, this is great. I'm going to read this in book form. This is something I can do. And of course, there was some stuff in like the library or like thrift stores. There was a bunch, like you just find dollar comics or quarter comics, not really a dollar. Now they're a dollar.
Right.
In thrift stores. And so anytime I saw Storm on a cover or Mystique, I was super into Mystique. I would be like, all right, well, it's for me.
Everyone's got their character. I have to wonder, now that I've said that theory about X-Men writers and like connecting with the one that you grew up on, I kind of wonder if that's a big part of the reason why so much of the X office seems to rep for Marrow in the X-Men election.
I did vote for Marrow.
Oh, you did?
I wasn't gonna reveal who I voted for. I regretted it a little bit immediately because I wanted Tempo to win. I knew it wasn't gonna happen.
Right.
But I'd been harassing and bullying the X office. I was like, you put Marrow on that list, Marrow's gonna win. And so I was like, I gotta put my money where my mouth is. Like, I gotta vote for Marrow. But I did regret it because I was like, oh, Tempo would actually be really cool to see on the next team.
Tempo would be really cool. I brought this up with Zach Jenkins when he came on the podcast, and I just like, I love the idea of Tempo being on the team because first off, there's so much like untapped potential there. But on top of that, I just love like Tempo's power set is really interesting.
It's so weird. Like, you can do a lot of weird stuff with it. And to me, like, that's what makes one of the many things that makes mutants fun is that they're just weird. You're just like, you do what now? like Marrow. It's like, you do what with your bones? What? Like, the Avengers can't do that.
No, they can't. I mean, I'm pretty sure if one of the Avengers used their bones to stab somebody, it would not be received well.
No, just Wolverine. He's the only Avenger that could do that.
Exactly. Oh, man. Bone claws. Ugh. I can't go into that because I'm going to have to get into some childhood trauma where I was like, no, Wolverine, don't lose your adamantium. That was a very traumatic moment in my life, Vita. My mom had to hear so much about that when I was a kid. I don't know if you were one of those people who, when you would read comics, you would tell your family about what you were reading. And you're just like, look at this you're looking at this person. They're like, they love you so much. But also, they have no idea what you're talking about.
No, I was not one of those people. But that is so freaking funny. I was one of the I would make so I collected cards, right? And we've talked about the X-Men cards and stuff like that. And so I would my mom would buy all of the like plastics for me to put the cards into, and so she'd be like, "Oh, what's this?" And then that's when she would get an earful about like what was going on. And I remember having a Tempo card from like the 95 series or whatever. Like, that was so good.
Yeah.
So good. That's when I was like, wait, is there another black mutant? Like,
yeah.
What?
And always wearing that, it was like a gold helmet that kind of...
it was like a bullet.
Yeah, it was like a bullet. I always never really understood why it looked like a bullet, but I mean, it looked cool.
It did look cool. Her new helmet looks super cool.
I don't know if I've seen the new helmet.
I think she's wearing it in the was it Marauders issue with the whiskey. It's got
right, yeah.
The spikes. They're not spikes. They're just like protrusions. They're like horns.
Yeah. Well, so you got, near as I can tell, your first taste in writing in the X-Men world in full was Age of X-Man, Prisoner X.
Yes.
With German Peralta, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, German. But German Peralta, and I'm interested in that experience. Obviously, was different than the current world, and that's not me discounting Age of X-Man or even the idea of like these kind of Age of Apocalypse like alternate universes or something like that. But it wasn't like the pure continuity and everything like that. Do you think, I'm interested in whether that helped you better understand the type of X-Men story you wanted to tell once you actually got in there and were like working in that, universe, even if it wasn't like 616, I guess.
I tend to tailor what I'm doing to kind of, if it's an event thing like Age of X-Men where each book is kind of supporting the other, that's what I want to do. So even though I had a book that was actually very contained, unlike everyone else's, everyone had kind of like free range in the world, and I was telling this story about the dark side of this utopia. But I wanted to make sure that if people were reading that book and just that book, it made sense. But if they were reading it in conjunction with other stuff, they would be like, "Oh, okay, I see a through line." And so when I got I was given the very basic premise, and then they were like, "Go buck wild."
Yeah.
And so when that happened, I was like, all right, in a very real way, it doesn't matter that they're mutants. It matters that they are like the characters that they are, but it doesn't matter that they have mutant powers because everyone has mutant powers and no one in my book is allowed to use them.
Right.
And so I started to kind of try and figure out, I was kind of like, this is unfair, not to me, but just like, I'm like, you really like did my boy Bishop like this? Like, that's so unfair. And then I was like, oh, actually, that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it in the way that like, it's like, oh, there's a prison. I much more wanted to be like, always this happens. And then I was like, oh, what else can I do with the characters that I have to kind of push this idea of the ways that we mistreat people. And then it kind of grew out of that. But the world was just so, I was like, I don't have to worry about all the other stuff that the writers have to worry about. All I have to worry about is what's happening right here. And I knew that I wanted to be a mystery because they gave me Bishop as my main dude. And I'm like, I think he's at his best when he's trying to figure out what's going on and orient himself, right? And so I treated it almost like another time travel story, right? Where he's just like, where am I? What's going on? Who are the players? That kind of stuff.
I do think that's really interesting that the story you wanted to tell kind of stemmed from your first reaction to it. Is that a common thing for you? I mean, obviously you're not always presented an idea to build off of to start with, but I do think that's an interesting bit of, I don't know, kismet's not the right word, but it's a interesting way to generate a story because it's like, it's a good, your first instinct is this, and it's like, how do I solve that for other people, not just myself? I think that's really interesting.
I do that a lot with licensed stuff specifically, because I feel like if I am having a question, then other people will have that question.
Right.
Or have other questions that might come out of the question that I have. And to me, one of the things, and this is more towards the stuff we're doing now, but I've always tended towards that anyway, is that, the books right now are all very additive. They're not destructive. We're not tearing things apart. We're kind of building out and exploring. And I've always been interested in that. And so that's how I tend to just do my stories anyway. I don't think you should run from the questions.
Yeah.
Like some people might be like, ooh, that's a crack. Let's just ignore that. And I'm like, no, let's go deeper into that. Like, let's strengthen the foundation by really interrogating what's going on.
That, honestly, that's one of the things I love the most about the first two issues of your New Mutants run, which I'm going to give a quick spiel about the premise set up in issue 14 straight from the solicit. It says, on the edge of Krakoan society, the New Mutants are loose in the wild hunt, going big, blowing things up, and combining powers to see who gets crowned king of the mountain. But something lurks in the trees, something old and hungry, and its favorite prey is young mutants, which is very creepy. And it turns out, well, I don't want to spoil it, but it's your book with Rod Reis and Travis Lanham and the usual suspects of like Tom Muller and everybody else. The thing I really love about that, what your idea is like, for this whole time, I had been thinking, like, I'm sure you can recall with clarity as well. Like, when you think about House of X #1, you think about like Jean Grey leading those young mutants into Krakoa for the first time. And then there's Wolverine gleefully playing with kids, which my friend was absolutely,
I love it.
He was absolutely convinced. He's like, this is wrong. Something's broken. Wolverine's not this nice. I'm like, what are you talking about?
He loves kids.
He loves kids. That's like
canonically.
Exactly. He's had so many like young,
daughters.
He likes the young people more than he likes all of his peers.
Yes.
But anyways, like that whole moment is just like, you're establishing this idea that there's going to be a lot of young people here. And so far, all we'd really seen was the top, you'd seen like the people who were doing their thing and, Excalibur, X-Men, et cetera, et cetera. I had been wondering, I was like, what is going on with all those young people? Are they just like sitting around being like, what is this place? Like, where is everyone? Why are they going to fight people with swords? What's happening? And you answered that. Was that kind of the foundational element to a certain degree for what you wanted to do?
I had questions. I've been in the room for a long time. Children of the Atom was pushed back a year almost. But I've been in all the meetings and we're constantly talking all the time. We're constant in communication. And I would always be like, okay, like this nation building stuff is awesome. so cool. All of these different aspects. What's happening on the island?
Right.
Like, I don't understand. And like, we have that map and I'd be like, what is this place? Like, what, like, don't name something the Wild Hunt and then not do anything.
Right.
And then John was like, you tell me, what is it? Like, let's talk about it. And so as we were having conversations about stuff, the whole room, I was like, you know what? These are conversations we should be having on the page. Because we'd be talking about, oh, well, this is what we think is going on, and this is what we think is going on, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, let's let everyone in on that conversation. Just because to me, that's really what's interesting. I like the big bombastic stuff, but I can't write that. I'm much more of a like characters doing stuff and trying to make people sad as possible. And yeah, I feel like, to me, nation building is all well and good and really interesting, but what does it mean for the people who inhabit that nation? That's my biggest concern. Also children. I too, literally my question, like a lot of the time was like, but who's watching them?
Right.
Like, anyone? Are they just running around in paradise? Because if I was doing that, I would absolutely be getting into trouble. So
yeah, I mean, I think the most famous story that involves children running around an island is Lord of the Flies, and that doesn't turn out very well.
Yeah, correct. But I felt too like we always think about, when we think about self-actualization and as marginalized people, we think on these grand scales, right? Which we should, right? Like we talk about all these systemic things and all this other stuff. But to me, equally as important is the really granular day-to-day stuff. What does this mean to you as a person? And with mutants especially, their entire existence up until now has been people who were persecuted at best, slaughtered by the millions at worst. What does it mean then to suddenly end up in paradise? Like, what do you do with yourself?
Right.
And as a kid too, especially like the little mutants, which I always find interesting when we see little mutants, when it's like, oh, that kid hasn't gone through puberty yet, but they're a mutant. That's so interesting to me. What are we doing? Like, what's going on? So,
yeah.
I always start with questions. And then I think if I have these questions, other people must have them. I don't want to act like we just magically have an answer for everything. Let's work it out on the page with the readers, because I feel like that's an advantage that like X-Men fandom has, is that everyone's really involved, for better or worse sometimes. But like, it's a very organic kind of fandom. Like that all happened because everyone is interested in being additive. So I was like, all right, let's do it. Let's rock and roll.
Well, yeah. And I mean, if you're talking about additive, not destructive, which, is something that I know, like that was, I believe, like a foundational element that Jonathan had for the room. Basically, it's like, it's not good enough to just destroy stuff because you want to destroy stuff. You got to have a reason for it. And the thing is like, what's more additive than adding a whole ton of mutants that previously were largely unknown to like underutilized? I mean, like, we were talking about Tempo. Tempo is obviously not like a new mutant, but at the same time, these are characters that have untapped potential by nature. And I think that is like an incredibly fertile ground for storytelling. So, and like, I love the direction you're taking it in. I am interested though, because, okay, so New Mutants, you took over with 14. Before that was a mix of Jonathan Hickman and Ed Brisson writing that series. When did you find out you were taking over New Mutants? And like, was it built off of that question that you were asking in the room and Jonathan being like, you find the answers? Or was it, an opportunity that was presented to you?
I was asked if it was something that I was interested in. I don't know when.
Yeah.
Time is a flat circle. It's meaningless. Last year, middle of the year, I don't remember when. Middle-ish. Yeah. After the summit, I guess. Mm-hmm. Was it before? Around there. I don't know.
Yeah, I got it.
Around Chicago. This was when there was a lot of uncertainty about like other stuff, and they were like, well, we know a bunch of stuff has been paused, but like New Mutants is not paused. Is this something that you're interested in? If not, no worries. if you have something for it, though, we'd love to hear what you have for it. And I immediately was like, yes, this is New Mutants seems like the book to explore some of my kind of more low to the ground questions about Krakoa specifically. And that was kind of the angle that I came at it with. And that me and Annalise, the editor, were talking about, where like, she was also like, yeah, we don't have a Krakoa book.
Right.
Like on Krakoa book. And not all of it is going to take place specifically on the island, but like it's island centered. And so, yeah, that was kind of where that came from. They were like, if you have something for this title, and I was like, yes, and also those characters, because they're the weirder X-Men.
Yeah. Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to my friends at Bad Idea. You may have heard of this experimental new comic book publisher. They're the crew that's debuting in select comic shops worldwide on March 3rd, 2021 with Matt Kint and Doug Braithwaite's ENIAC #1. And they're doing so a little bit differently than their peers. First, each issue is oversized and ad-free. Second, each issue comes with a bonus B-side story, giving readers a little something extra with each issue. Lastly, and this is the wild part, so listen up, they don't publish variants, trades, or digital versions of their comics, so if you want one or all of them, you better get to the Bad Idea retailer near you and be there on a Wednesday. Don't have one near you? Pre-order online or explore your options for mail order at badideacorp.com to make sure you don't miss out on ENIAC or upcoming titles from creators like Zeb Wells, David LaFuente, Marguerite Bennett, and many more. And now, back to the show. Well, and I also think that, you know, the original batch of New Mutants, you know, Cannonball, Sunspot, you know, Mirage, et cetera, all of them, Wolfsbane, those characters have always been, always been very, like, well-loved characters. But I feel like, you know, to a certain degree, they've lacked a specific direction. Like, you know, they exist to a certain, I mean, like a lot of the books that they've been in have felt like books that exist mostly because characters or because readers love them and they want to read more about them. But I mean, I like what you did in that you reoriented them as teachers of the next generation. Like they're the ones who stepped in and are helping them figure things out. When did you figure out that? All right, okay, let's not do when. We don't want to do when again. But I mean, like, what made that a specific angle for something that you wanted to do?
Well, when they asked me if I had any interest in the New Mutants, I was like, what have they been doing so far? Right. Okay, this is all cool stuff. And it all seems to me like what they're trying to do, they're like the middle child.
Yeah.
Right. They're trying to figure out where they stand in this new paradigm. Right. Because they're not the X-Men.
Right.
I mean, some of them have been X-Men. Right. But like, you know, when you think of the X-Men, that calls to mind the full grown-ups.
Right.
And Jordan and I will argue all day about how old they are. But you think of Cyclops and Storm and Jean and the variety of grown folk. But when you think of like, you know, the kids, you're like, well, they're not like that's a Glob and, you know, all those guys.
Right.
And so for me, I was like, what does it mean also to be someone who is no longer the new kids on the block, right? But also probably not even interested in being in the X-Men, right? Like, what does it mean when you're kind of just like, I mean, I love the space adventure that John did. And I was like, they have a bunch of free time, I guess. They're going to space. And then when Ed was doing the stuff where they went out and got Cosmo, I was like, oh, yeah, like, these two things feel right. It feels like they're trying to figure out what they need to do. And I was like, oh, I'll just make the book about that. They have to figure out what their place is in this new, in this new status quo, because they're like, you know, it felt like they're at that age roughly where you're trying to figure out what it means to be part of your society and community in a more concrete way, in a way that you give back. And so that's kind of like, and also I just thought that all of them having gone through all the stuff that they had would be really good at being mentors. And at, you know, they're not the ones that are in charge of building the nation or running the Hellfire Trading Company or any of that. They're on the island and they're the ones that are seeing all the stuff going on and probably the ones going, where are the adults? Oh no, where are the adults?
Okay, I couldn't find my copy of 14, so I don't have it in front of me. But if I remember correctly, wasn't your first like data page basically just like a letter being like, hey, what are you guys doing about all these kids? And they're like, cool, you're taking that over.
Yeah, that was basically almost how the conversation went. It's like, where are the adults? Like me and Leah being like, hey. And then John's like, you tell me? It's like, well played, sir.
I love the fluidity of that, though, because it's like, if you present a actionable question, it's like, how do you turn that into a comic? That's great.
That's the goal. I hope it's working out. I feel like I like not having to worry about big world-ending stuff, because when you're involved in your community, the day-to-day stuff can be world-ending. So someone has to be in charge of that. And I think that it is absolutely possible to tell stories on that scale that still feel really big. And so that's the goal. Also, having Rod as your collaborator really just makes that incredibly easy. It's just the best.
Rod was the next person I was going to bring up, because Rod, okay, I'm going to admit something terrible, and I've written about this before. I originally, when the books were announced, I was like, I don't know about Rod on these books. Like, previously, I had this idea in my head that I didn't love Rod's art, and it was because in my mind it was very static. And it's funny because the complete opposite is true. There's so much life to Rod's art. And I use this actually the first 2 issues that you've written, I've written in my 10 things column specific art things from the book that Rod did. The first one was Warlock pantomiming behind everyone and doing the exact moves everyone was doing, which was just absolutely incredible. And then the Shadow King face that Rod did, that was like, that was like Sienkiewicz times I'm gonna crap myself because it's so terrifying. It was just like, it's really intense, but that's the spectrum he lives in, is like the most lived in characters you can have, or like Sienkiewicz level fear. And that's saying a lot, because, and I've admitted this on the podcast before too, I've never read Sienkiewicz's New Mutant stuff because it scared me so much when I was a kid. I've never read it.
It's good. It's really good, but it is very scary. Even when he's doing stuff that's like fun and cute, you're just like, but when does it turn sinister? He's one of my favorite artists. Rod, I will just make suggestions about stuff, and then he'll just to the max. Like, I remember, like, I was like, oh, in this panel, let's have Warlock do what Danny's doing, and in this one, let's have him do what Warpath is doing. But then he just kind of like carried it through, and I was like, perfect. Like, this is so much better than anything I could ever imagine. To me, like, coming onto the book, it was his book to me, and I was like the new person on the book, because
sure,
he's the through line, and he'd been working with them for so many issues. And so one of the things that I wanted to kind of make sure is that, like, I, was in service of the things that he wanted to do in the book. And he really likes doing, like, emotional scenes. Like, he's super into that kind of stuff, and expressive kind of stuff. And he loves Warlock, and Wolfsbane. So I was like, all right, let's do it. Let's freaking do it. That Shadow King page is even scarier in inks.
Oh my god!
Without the color, it's terrifying. I got it. I remember opening it late on my phone. And I was like, oh, Jesus. I was not prepared for this. He's great. He's kind of like, he's a genius in so many ways, because he doesn't just get drama. He's really funny.
Right. Yeah.
And so to be able to balance, all this intense stuff with, like, some background gags, or even just like kind of like heavy cartooning through like Warlock and stuff, to me, it makes it feel really full, like in a really great way, like filled out.
Yeah. Okay, so this is taking something that you said in an email, but I don't think it's like I feel like it's a good approximation of what you were going for with New Mutants. You told me there was like lots of feels, but also pizza parties. And the thing that I really love about that is, like, that's a tough vibe for a lot of artists to pull off. But I feel like Rod is pretty much perfect for it, because in all facets of character acting, Rod is exceptional. Like, one character I think Rod excels at is Scout, Honey Badger, whatever.
Yes.
You want.
My God.
Like, there's so many little faces you see on Scout through the first 2 issues that you're just like, you can like feel what Scout is going through. And I love that.
he said to me that he really enjoys writing or drawing other complex emotions.
Sure.
And I think that really comes through with Scout in particular, right? Like this like longing and also like frustration and sadness and all that kind of stuff all coming through in the same image. Like it's bonkers to me because it feels like it's living, right? Like his art feels very, very much like it's living in a way that like sometimes comics, like you said, like because it's a static medium, it can feel like difficult to convey
right
movement and emotion, and he's just so good at it. He's definitely broken my heart with some of the Scout like panels.
Yeah.
Like, Rod, you're killing me.
It's tough. I mean, like I'm reading the Scout stuff and I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, I want to like crawl into the pages and like give her a hug.
Same. I was talking to my editor earlier, and she's just like, oh my God, how are you doing this? I'm so sad. I'm like, just wait.
So you knew Rod was like the through line. You knew the world you were going to be dealing with, the story you wanted to tell. But why was that feels but also pizza parties vibe the one you wanted to go for?
I was rereading a lot of New Mutants, and one of the things that you talk about this, but for the X-Men, so I'll touch on it in a second. But one of the things that I really like is when you have these characters who go through all this stuff, but then also do normal, very mundane stuff.
Yeah.
And like, so like you talk about them playing baseball or basketball all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that's good. Like it to me, I was rereading this early stuff, and they like go through like the Demon Bear, and then there's like a sleepover party in the next issue.
Yeah.
And you're just like, it should feel super like disjointed, but it doesn't. It feels right because they're kids, or not kids, but they're young. You know what I mean? So it's just like they'll handle their trauma, but also cute boys.
Well, I think one of the underrated parts of why so many people love the X-Men has nothing to do with any of the big superheroics. It's like, the ordinary things that make them feel like people and like makes them feel even more relatable is where it lands. I mean, it's like, I think part of the reason why I feel for Scout is because like I can see myself in Scout. Like, who hasn't felt like they were being ignored by like their, I don't know, like whatever you would consider Dakin, like older brother figure.
It's a big brother.
Yeah, big brother, exactly. Or like, you want to talk to people about these problems, or like, I mean, God, like Scout trying to talk to the quartet of New Mutants who showed up that don't know her, but she knows them, and it's just like those types of things. Like you can see yourself there, and I think that's like one of the huge powers of the X-Men, but maybe particularly the New Mutants because they were always like the young ones. I mean, I guess the young ones that weren't the original five, who were young, but
right.
You read now and you're just
they felt older though. Like
they did.
Yeah, they were all teenagers, but I was like, they're full grown. They have mortgages. Come on. Like Bobby aside, all the other ones felt like full grown people.
Totally. But yeah, I mean, I think that relatability is huge. So leaning into that here, just, I don't know. It's like, you're still gonna have the creepy Shadow King stuff, but you can also have, getting rejected by God, what's the word I'm looking for? A figure of authority like Cosmo did. I mean, like, that's tough. Like, those are things that everybody's gone through. And I think that relatability really shines through in the book so far.
Thank you. One of the things that I really wanted to play with was the idea of miscommunication, but not because you're not listening, because you're coming from a different perspective.
Oh, sure.
And so, like, for me, like, that started kind of in 14. I mean, I'm trying to do it across the book, right? But like Scout is asking about like clones and resurrection, and everyone else is like, oh, we're sure it's fine, or like whatever. And that's not comforting to someone because like for them, it doesn't affect them. But for her, I don't think she's necessarily afraid to die, but the idea of that kind of injustice doesn't sit well with Scout.
Right.
Kind of traditionally, she's been kind of that person that's like, that's not right.
Yeah.
Like, and then, with Cosmo too, like, we so quickly forget what it was like to go through all of these things,
right.
All of these things as, tweens and preteens and then in teenagers. I've forgotten most of it. I remember that it was not fun, that I hated it. But like the idea that you're trying to talk to someone about your problems and they're going, oh, well, you just don't understand. You're fine. Like, it's okay. It's like, that's not helpful. I'm going through a crisis right now. Please, like, meet me where I am. A long time ago, I either I think I read it in like a child psychology book or something, or I heard it in my child psych lecture. But yeah, it was the lecture. My professor was talking, and he was like, kids come to you and they'll have problems, and they will seem so small to you, but to them, it's literally as big as it gets because this is all they know. And if you brush them aside, then they know they can't trust you. So they will not come to you again, and they will not come to you when it really matters.
Right.
So you have to meet them on their level. That doesn't mean that you catastrophize with them, right? What that means is you understand that, the emotional impact of what they're going through. And, Danny is one of my favorite characters, but she's gone through her own stuff. It isn't what Cosmer has gone through. And, it's really easy for someone to look at Cosmer and, for Danny to be like, but you're perfect. Like, we love you here. That's what Krakoa is about. Like, you don't have to be what they want you to be. You can just be you, and that you is perfect. But Cosmer's like, I'm not like from here. Just because we now live in paradise doesn't mean that every part of my life before here was like erased. Not that Danny would think that. She doesn't think that, but like her perspective is one like, oh, we're finally safe. And Cosmer's like, but I still am this. I don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And so that kind of miscommunication to me is really, really fascinating because there's no bad guy there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm all about kind of interrogating, what from one perspective could be seen as something really bad. And it's like, well, maybe, what Danny is trying to impart to this person is that we accept you. And what this kid is hearing is that we don't care about what you feel.
Right. Yeah. The quartet that Cosmer is part of, Null, Rainboy, and No Girl, the Shadow Queen or Shadow King quartet. I mean, that's an interesting group because, like, I'm not trying to say that Danny is saying this by any means, but they're used to being different in a different way than like somebody like Danny is. And I think that that's something that, that's maybe where that you're hearing, but you're not necessarily understanding. Like somebody like Cosmer, when Cosmer's powers came, it warped her. And it's just, I don't know. I just find that to be a really fascinating territory, but that ties into something that I wanted to bring up. Obviously, with Krakoa being this just, there's a massive amount of mutants there now. And that means that you had a lot of characters to pick from, which is, I think, to a certain degree, one of the problems with like focusing on a story like this is like, you're always going to be forgetting somebody's favorite or something like that. But so far, it's kind of focused on like a core group of the original New Mutants, and then also like Scout, the foursome that I mentioned before, and an array of others. But what made that group the one that you want to focus on, at least for now? I'm sure you can spin out later on.
Do you mean the younger kids or the New Mutants or both?
Mostly the younger kids, because like there's just so many.
There is a reason why I chose those mutants, or when I was thinking about that particular group, they all had to have something in common, and that had to be that their experience with being a mutant was not something that they could hide,
right?
Or that had really changed them physically, as well as all of the other stuff that happens. And in No Girl's case, that it was done to her, but it was because she was a mutant. It's a lot.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. But that was, I was trying to think about, for me, Cosmer in particular was a character that I wanted to kind of carry over because I really loved her. I was like, oh, Ed, you made me love this brand new mutant.
Yeah.
Ed's really good at that. I think Ed is really good at writing the younger mutants. But I was like, all right, I want to craft this story about these kinds of misunderstandings. That means that the people that she associates with have to have not the same experience, but kind of feel similar things about their situation. Or at least you would look at them and go, they are having a similar experience. I think that all of them have very singular experiences.
Right.
But again, it's complicated. And so that's kind of how I crafted that group. And of course I had lots of help from Leah Williams.
Yeah.
The keeper of the data. She loves this kind of stuff too. So She and I kind of went back and forth, and I was like, this is the stuff that I need that group to be doing. This is the stuff that I need, these mutants to be confronting. So yeah, that's how that group got put together. As far as the like New Mutants part of New Mutants, I was like, I want the New Mutants.
Yeah, exactly. It's in the title.
But I didn't want to separate Sam and Roberto. So I was like, they're happy in space. They'll be back, but like for now, let them just be cute and happy in space.
Yeah, I was happy they showed up for Doug and Bay the Blood Moon's reception. I don't even know what you call that.
Yeah, it's like their party.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, I don't know why. I just have this like deep, immediate love for Bay the Blood Moon, and Bay the Blood Moon is forever.
Loved her immediately. We were like large wife. I don't know who's large wife, but will be large wife. And then I was like, oh yeah.
That was that was the moment where I was like, I went from being like, I like Ten of Swords, and then I was when that issue got it. Was that a New Mutants issue?
It was I think it was Excalibur.
No, it was Excalibur. You're right. And when that issue came, and every single face that Phil Noto did in that issue was just like astonishing. I was like so on board. I was like, yes. I love the fact that like, this series of like uncanny challenges that everyone has to deal with. And like the worst fighter of them all is given maybe the most intense challenge you could possibly think of, which is marrying this gigantic stranger who cannot understand him.
It was so
or he
fun.
Can understand.
Like, yeah, she can understand him, but he can't understand her. I loved that film. We were just like throwing out these ideas, and then we were just like, well, what would be fun to see? And then I can't remember who it was. It's probably Jerry. But it was just like clearly a marriage. And TQS Trash Queer Squad went, tell me more. who's married and to whom? And then we we were all kind of like throwing around ideas, but also we're just all feral creatures, like the whole room, like every single one of us in the room is just like a wild animal. And we were like, very small man, very large woman. Yes, we love this. To me, in my mind, I was like, oh, this is kind of like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Like, it's just like,
yeah, gigantic Jessica Rabbit, and she's also red. There you go.
She's perfect.
I like to imagine that somebody on Zoom brought out a whiteboard that they had like height differences or something like that. They're like, this is perfect because as you can see, no one can hear this, but I'm actually gesturing of what a whiteboard would look like in this situation. But I am interested in like in Ten of Swords. So you worked on Marauders number 13 with Matteo Lolli, and great issue. But I am interested in how like when it was first announced at C2E2, I believe, it was one thing, and then it evolved. What was that?
Very quickly.
Was that project unusual even for the X Office? Because it seemed like it was like even more riffing than usual. It just seemed like, I mean, I would say probably the two most oddball but also delightful projects so far from this current X era is that and Empire X-Men, which is like, I think a lot of people
awesome.
like may have missed on this or possibly, but it was fantastic. And
it was so fun.
it felt like those two felt more than anything that anyone else has done. Is just like a room full of people who love this stuff riffing.
It was already we met before it had already been well planned before that. Right. And when we were talking about it initially, it was very much like that anyway. Like we were just absolutely just talking back and forth. There's stuff in every book that everyone else came up with and had, and tweaked and all that kind of stuff. And then when it was announced, and then everything had to change. When the Fire Nation attacked, it was like, okay, this is going to have to be us, but cranked to 1,000,000, right? So like that means you would think that would mean, oh, we have to crack down, we have to be tighter, we have to do this. And we were very careful about the planning that went into this was bananas. But, one of the things that I really enjoy about rooms with these people is that instead of coming down and being like, all right, so this is what we're going to do because we have so much to do in limited time, it went, all right, everyone put your heads together. we need to make this the coolest thing ever, and that means we need everyone's brain juice. Like, we can't, there's no dictating. It does not work. If we dictate, then it just becomes something that's forgettable. This has to be something that feels like community, because that's the whole point of Krakoa, right? Like, we kind of run the room, I guess, how you would run on the island, where it's like everyone has their say and everyone is, everyone is contributing as much as possible. And I think, I legitimately think that is why it landed as well as it did. And that's why it works as well as it does, because everyone was so invested, because we all had a say in, how things went. And you go back and you write your own issue, but we, a lot of the beats, like the bigger beats, we were like, all right, these have to fall somewhere. Let's figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
It was great.
Well, I think that it's kind of interesting. This is like a consistent through line in our conversation. It's just like, there is an overlap between the environment that you're creating and like the worlds you all are creating. And I find that to be really fascinating, because like, collaboration seems like it's, at the heart of everything that's happening in the X office right now. But even in New Mutants, that's an important part, because you have the synergizing, you have the combining of powers and everything, which is like something that was in a much different scale, was introduced in like, I think it was
X-Men 11.
What's that?
Or something like that. X-Men 11 or something like that. I forget which one.
But I mean, I even think that's kind of like a root of like the powers of 10 idea of like all these characters being fused together and everything like that. And it's interesting because like it's something that works on that level as like a long-term building block. But then on top of it, it works because it's, I mean, honestly, like besides like the fastball special, it's like, I'm surprised this type of thing hadn't happened before, because, combining of powers just makes a lot of sense. Why was that synergizing element something that you were really interested in tapping into the story? Is it just because it fits well with like the teaching nature, or is it more than that?
For me, it was actually because it fit more into what the New Mutants were doing in trying to figure out how to serve the people in their community. And so like, we have all these skills and separate, we've never really succeeded separately. We have to work together. And, why don't we just combine powers? I feel like it's the logical next step. That's how you truly work as a team. Like I think about, this is a bad example, I guess, but I think about making a comic book, right? Like you're combining all of your powers to make this one thing and make it as good as you can. So like, I can't draw. If I draw a comic, that's not going anywhere. Let me tell you right now. You know what I mean? I can't letter, and I can't do, all of these other things, but together, we're creating something really awesome. I think it's really awesome. I think that it's fun and impactful. And I think Rod carries most of that, but like, I think I contribute. And so, I wanted to have like physical manifestations of the kind of steps that the New Mutants were trying to take in integrating their community. And it's just also just cool. Like I was just, going back to House and Powers, like, the 5 is so wild. Like John really sat there and was like, how do I do the absolute weirdest thing possible right now? And I was like, I was wildly impressed. I was like, you did something new with the property that has been around for much longer than me. Like, and so carrying that forward, I was like, that's our level now.
Right.
Like we can't go back. Like we have to push that idea, and not just in training. We have to push that idea, throughout their lives. And so that's kind of also like, I think what everyone's trying to do. I know Leah's doing a lot of that kind of stuff and X Factor and their powers should be synergizing in the same way that their lives are synergizing.
Yeah.
And I just have the kids, so I get to do ridiculous stuff like Sharknado.
I loved it though. It was amazing. Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to Macroverse. Macroverse is an exciting digital comics platform that makes next-gen comics custom crafted for your phone. Macroverse's comics utilize its unique tap story format, which ensures this isn't a PDF on an iPad or an endless scroll, but a designed for mobile experience where every episode is crafted to take advantage of this one-of-a-kind style. Macroverse is curated for quality, with every series they publish being something they believe deserves to be read by a massive audience. Think of it like HBO for comics, with over 35 titles and 400 episodes from names like Brian Stelfreeze, Juan Doe, Paul Scheer, and more. Check out Macroverse today by downloading the app on iOS or Google Play, and get started with a rotating collection of free episodes, or unlock the entire universe for just $4.99 a month, with half of all profits going to the creators themselves. And now, back to the show. I mean, it just makes sense to me, though. I mean, it's funny because, like, God, I'm trying to remember, but did you ever play, I think it was Final Fantasy II, Palomamporum? Do you know Palomamporum?
Oh, man, I do not.
They were characters in Final Fantasy II, and they were twins who were wizards, and they could combine powers, and I always thought that was, like, the greatest thing. And I just, like, I don't know, when I was reading Powers of 10, and then when I think it was X-Men 11, as you said, where like it was just like, I think it was an Empire tie-in even, and it was just like this fusion like issue where it's like, okay, so you're gonna bring up the volcano stuff, and then you're gonna freeze it, and then it's gonna turn into metal, and then we're gonna shoot that at him because I'm Magneto, and that's what we can do. And it's like that type of stuff. It's like, it's I guess in some ways, it's kind of like the perfect idea of additive, not destructive again, because it's like you're building off of what was already there, but not materially changing it. You're just using it in a different way than others had. And I think that's really interesting, because it's like you can use Sharknado, and all of a sudden we have like, a new way of seeing these characters. And I think that's fantastic.
And I think, too, one of the fun things is that I have the kids, and so they're just exploring, just scraping the surface of what they can do. And as they continue to grow, then their synergies will grow. But I also think of it, too, like I was listening to the World War Z audiobook, which is that book is phenomenal. I love that book. They were talking about all the things, I think it was in that book, that it takes to make a Coke.
Oh, sure.
Right? And it's just like this from this place, and this from this place, and this from this country. And it's like, but now we can't have any of that because we can't, all of the supply lines are jacked up. And I was like, oh yeah, it takes, you take a bunch of different, separate, really cool things, and then you get something that you could not get in any other way. Like, oh, that's what I want to be doing. Like, I want to do that with mutants. I want it to get to a point where we're scaffolding, where it's like, let's get to level 3. What does that look like? If these two are synergizing and we add another thing, like what happens when you get there? It's just cool. I don't know. Like, again, like, I feel like this is an advantage that like the X-Men and mutants have, is that we can get really weird and really experimental, and people are just like, sure.
Yeah, exactly. I think that all of this is really interesting because you were, when we were talking about Prisoner X in the beginning, Prisoner X was interesting because you exist in this world, but you could be affected by it, but you still got to do your own thing. And I feel like that's what's really interesting about the X line right now, is like Leah can do her thing over on X Factor, and with David Baldeon, and it's just like absolutely incredible. And then there's like all the different books are doing their own thing, but it's interesting because like I think more than, I've been an X-Men fan for a long time, and I don't want to overstate it, but at the same time, I think more than ever before, all of these different books are painting a more holistic picture of what the world of mutants is like right now, because like they all get their own space, but they all collectively create a vision of what Krakoa and the broader influence of Krakoan life is like. And I think that makes it really interesting. It's like, it means that, maybe these synergizing for these young mutants isn't a big deal now. Maybe this is just a small thing, but all of a sudden that's like a little bit that could be used later by somebody else, or something that like Leah does, or Teeny does, or anybody else. Like, these are things that could be used by you, and you just don't know what it is. Next thing you know, somebody says something and you got your next arc. And I think that's amazing.
That's exactly kind of, I don't think that this, like the Krakoan paradigm works without this kind of cohesion across the line. I think that, for the most part, you can just read one of the books if you want to, barring the like event, right?
Right.
You can just pick up Wolverine if you just are super into Wolverine, or you can pick up X Factor if that's your jam. But one of the things that like really made me feel good about being part of the room was that the idea was that we wanted to be a line.
Yeah.
Not a bunch of books that cross over characters, but an actual line of books. And that means that it's almost like improv, except that it's well planned. You have to, yes, and you can't just cut off ideas. You can't do that kind of stuff. You have to kind of weave together this tapestry. And I think that like, that's right. Like there are things that like I'm laying down that maybe never get picked up, and that's okay, because I'm hopefully laying it down in a way that just goes, oh, that was cool. That was interesting. But I fully would love someone else to pick up in their book if they wanted to, like just weird stuff. I'm trying to remember what happens in 14 and 15, so I don't go too far off. I don't want to spoil anything, but
sure.
Yeah, like I feel like that's what makes it interesting. X-Men fans tend to want to be as, immersed as possible. And I think that all of us working together, but using our own voices does that. No one is kind of negating what anyone else is doing in their book just by having all this open communication. So we just get a lot out of it. It feels really nice.
Yeah. I do think it's funny, though, because it does create an environment, and I think this is a good environment, where you had this huge contingent of X-Men fans on Twitter who are like, we do not want Polaris to win the X-Men election because Leah's doing such a good job with Polaris right now, and that's where she belongs.
Yeah, people got real passionate. I like the passion. I think that when it gets me, and then I'm out. But it's interesting, too, because, the argument that like the X-Men book is the flagship book, and so you're afraid to have the highest profile possible by being on it, is an argument that I don't personally agree with, but I get it. Like that's a good argument. But the fact that people are able to recognize that like these characters are where they are for a reason, and the person that is shepherding them, the team that is in charge of putting them forward, is trying to tell the best story for that character. Now, that being said, whoever, ends up on the X-Men, there will be a story for them that makes sense and that is trying to do the best for them there too. But that, again, I think that comes from us all being in constant contact, because we all understand, like, instead of everyone having a completely wildly different take on a character, what has started to happen is we consult each other. Mm-hmm. And so, what happened in 15?
15 is Doug and Baze get together. There's the fort kind of burns down, and they have to deal with that. Cosmer asks Danny to take her through the Crucible, and Shadow King is creepy as hell.
Thank you. Perfect. So with all of that kind of stuff, the party especially, I wanted to make sure that I was portraying the characters that were even in the background in a way that made sense for the books that they were in, right? And there will be future things. There've been a bunch of characters that have crossed in and out of stuff before X Factor started. Rachel, kind of popped into Excalibur, right? Mm-hmm. And like what happened is behind the scenes, we're all like, do you think this is what would happen? And like, I'm not the authority on the New Mutants character, but like people tend to go, all right, well, you're mostly the person using them, you and Rod. So what do you, does this feel right to you? And that's not something that you really found before, unless the collaborative teams already knew each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, it feels more cohesive because the characterization tends to kind of be across books.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, I'm very happy because a character I rep for is iBoy, and iBoy is living his best life. And I do think it's funny, though, because like, I don't know if you remember it, but there was this, I don't even remember what issue it was. And I may have hallucinated it, but there's this one issue that takes place in the future where iBoy is up in this like satellite and he's like running. Yes. I think it was a Jason Aaron, like Wolverine in the X-Men issue. And I just remember being like, I can't believe that iBoy is capable of this, but it kind of makes sense. And I feel like Leah is helping him live his best life, which is delightful. Like, I don't know. I don't want to spoil it, but in the most recent issue of X Factor, when iBoy is like, she's lying. Like, there's like this bit where he recognizes that Polaris is lying. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. I think that's great. And I love that, you know, if you ever decide iBoy needs to come over, you can just be like, hey, you know, I just want to make sure I'm following your characterization. Like, that's ideal. That's consistency. It's not like fighting over turf. It's making sure everybody's turf looks right. So
yeah, I that's the thing that I really love about this room, is that there's no ego involved in any of it. It's not like, all right, this is my book, these are my characters, and you have to come to me. It's much more like floating ideas. Like I'll also float ideas about like the things that I'm writing, right? Like, and everyone kind of talks about it. But it's also just like, it just feels more fun if you kind of have a general understanding of something, right? Like, you don't want to go into your job and be like, can someone help me figure out the right? No? Oh, okay. Like,
oh my God. I'm trying to imagine my job if I came on and instead of people being like, I'm like, hey, so what is this client like? They're like, I will never tell you because you're trying to take my work and I hate you. And it's just like that. That's impossible.
It's really like that idea is so stressful. And, you know, X-Men in particular, there are a bunch of characters that always end up in whatever X-Men, like, it's just, if there is a book with mutants, they'll end up there eventually. And so, like, to be able to track that is also useful for us. Like, sometimes, you know, my voice is going to be different than Leah's voice is going to be different than, you know,
Jonathan's
Ben's voice.
Yeah.
But to be able to not just go, do you think this is right? But to be able to also have the leeway of going like, I think in this situation, this character would do this, even though it might be a little weird, gut check me. That just feels like so much stress off my plate. It's so great. And also, like, you know, writing comics is really hard and really isolating. And so having, like, I've never had an office before. And even though we can't physically go to a place, like, we hang out, you know, we have our, like, quote unquote work Slack or whatever, where we all, like, hang out every day. So it's like being in an office and just being able to go and talk to your coworkers about stuff. And that the stress relief in that is so incredible. I think it just ends up making better stories.
I'm interested. I mean, obviously you can't recreate that environment in every situation, but do you think, I don't know. I mean, I wrote about it today. I've been thinking a lot lately about, like, anthologies and, like, different structures to, like, the single issue format and things like that. And I find that stuff to be really interesting because, you know, formats like that to a certain degree are like a rising tide that lifts all ships. It's like, you know, you can have something like John Ridley and Nick Darrington and Laura Braga on a next Batman story, but then you can also have, like, you know, okay, I'm going to terribly pronounce another name. I keep setting myself up for this. Anik? And how do you pronounce your...
I've never heard
said out loud.
Said out loud. In my mind it's Anarchy, but I'm wrong.
Anarchy. Well, no,
99%
right.
of the time. So, like, I'm terrible at this. I'm one of those kids that, like, saw a bunch of things written but never said it out loud and then just wildly chopped up words. So.
I think that is literally every comic book fan, because, like, 95% of the words in comics are made up. So you're just like, Galactus, I guess? Like, who didn't watch the Venom movie and be like, that's how you pronounce symbiote? Okay. I didn't know that. That's good to know.
You said Anole earlier, and I was like, oh, that is probably how you pronounce that. That's not how I do. Anole?
Oh, no, it might be Anole.
No, I think I'm wrong.
I have no idea. I mean, it's like someday we're going to find out Rock Slide was never Rock Slide. It was like something completely different. I know I'm bringing up I'm sorry, Rock Slide. I love you. But I mean, it is interesting, though, because, you know, you have that type of book where you can do that Batgirl story, which I really like, and you can have other stories in there. Like, I mean, I don't know if you read it, but Brandon Thomas and Sumit Kumar's Outsiders story is great. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I would have missed it if it weren't for the fact it was in Next Batman. I'm glad it's there. But I mean, even in, like, creator-owned stuff, like, how I am interested in seeing if, because I feel like creators are tighter than they've ever been. There's more cohesive creator groups than ever. And it's less, it's more like the X line and less like, you know, like I just finished reading the Stan Lee biography that Abraham Reisman did, and like, you know, reading about the 60s, it's just like, I mean, to a certain degree, everybody kind of hated each other, and it was,
that sounds so stressful.
I mean, it sounds so
Could not be me.
stressful. But I am interested, do you think that this type of thinking, this collaborative thinking, could be something that you carry forward into other projects?
I try to as much as possible. I absolutely think that having open lines of communication with people that are working within the same line or with the same characters, because of the way that comics work, multiple people can have the same character, is very important. I think that one of the things that is really lucky about comics is that, you know, the editors are kind of the stewards of whatever particular title, and they are the through line, they are the continuity. And so they, you know, now more than ever, I find editors are very, very happy to give you not just the information that you need, but also, you know, do introductions via email so you can talk to other people who have worked on the project or you're a collaborator or any of that kind of stuff. You know, for a long time, like collaborators were kept separate, right? Like that was like a thing, but like not anymore. And so that's really lucky. But I try to, as much as possible, if I'm working on something, to get as much information and to give as much information as anyone could need. And if I can talk to the other people involved, then I feel very, very blessed. I also just make it a point to, you know, give my collaborators my email separate. I'm just like, just in case you need me, or my Discord or whatever. Like, all right, hit me up if you want to talk, because I think that we're moving towards this more and more, which is vital, I think. But I think that the people that get forgotten are the artists and colorists a lot.
Yeah,
and it's just like they're like, it doesn't make any sense not to be talking to everyone as much as possible. Often a colorist will be a person that's a through line for a title, where an artist or writer or artist writers, like all of them cycle out. But one of the strengths of anthologies too is that you have a little more freedom, but you also do have information about what kind of other stuff is in the book. So you have, you know, an understanding of where you fit, which is really nice. I love anthologies. I love short stories. I think they're great.
I do think it's really interesting. I mean, this is something that's come up in conversations with other people. Like, I think I talked to Matt Rosenberg about this, and I think I talked to Chip Zdarsky about this. And it's like a lot of creators who are working at Marvel, you know, and other publishers, but they grew up on these really long stories, but at the same time, they have a different value they have a different idea of what a good comic could look like. It doesn't always have to be a 200 issue run. It could be 4 issues and you're done. And it's just like all killer, no filler, beginning, middle, end. Or it's like something where you can do like Empire X-Men, where it's like, I think the first issue was Jonathan and Teeny, and then you and Jerry? Or no, you, Ben? Were you the third issue?
I was with Ed and Zeb, I think. Yeah, I was third issue.
Right. And there was like 6 or 7 people who worked on that book. And the last issue, I think, was just Jonathan. But it's like, if you told somebody in like 1986 that a comic could be made that way, they'd probably like, what the hell's wrong with you? But, and even like, I mean, even something earlier, like you saying that you consulted with Rod about the type of book that he would want to draw. It's like, that stuff is kind of rare, but it's also, or excuse me, that stuff was rare. And I think that it's interesting because you can look through the history of great comic books, whether you're talking about Marvel with something like, like Hawkeye with Matt and Dave, A+ stuff, but those two were tight. They talked about stuff. They worked stuff out.
And that's clear, right?
Yeah,
like, that's
exactly.
The thing to me, like I look at the books that I really love and I go, I have a very wide taste. Like I like a bunch of different kinds of stuff, but I always think about is there anything that it has in common? And it seems to be open lines of communication and everyone getting something that they want out of the book.
Right.
You're a
stakeholder.
I feel like, yeah, exactly. Like it doesn't make any sense to work on things that you don't want to work on and to have no voice. I feel like, even when I'm writing like a one-page thing. That is rarer. I've only done it like 2 times. But like, even a short story that with an artist that I'll never work with again, one of the things that I always put before I start scripting is I have this little spiel that I do, and I'm like, hey, this is not a blueprint. This is not scripture. This is just a bunch of things that I think would be cool to happen. Here's the emotional, like take the emotional core. And if you feel like you have a better way of doing it, great. I will change any and all on page text. Like, I do not care. I will rewrite all of the dialogue and all of the captions and anything that needs to be done, because I want you're the one that has to draw it. You're the one that is doing not just the bulk of the work, but putting the most of yourself into it. So put yourself into it. My vision is not a thing. Like, I'm just jamming. Mm-hmm. And that's something that like I put in because I feel like sometimes artists are just like I know that sometimes when I work on things, I don't know how much freedom I have to do what I want. And so to me, then it is important to make sure that the people I'm working with understand that, like, go buck wild, go absolutely nuts, because you're not going to be wrong.
Right.
There are very few things that I have ever been like, we have to change that. There are certain things that like unintentionally someone might not know a thing that I'm like, all right, well, this is actually central. And usually it's minor. Usually it's just like, this is a peaceful scene. Don't have someone holding a gun.
Was one of them Rod made Shadow King too scary and he needed to redraw it?
So scary. I think they had him recolor it, because I remember another set of colors and it was scarier, and I was like, oh, they changed it for the printed. Huh, okay, that was really scary.
It works in the end, but I love it. I love this perspective, and I love. It's a good direction. It's a healthy direction for comics, I think. But Vita, that is actually all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about New Mutants, Rod scaring the both of us and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, as always.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Vita Ayala. You can find them on Twitter at DefinitelyVita and their work in New Mutants and the upcoming Children of the Atom. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating and review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at SketchComic or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Bradley Roeder, Carl Troy, Megan Marsden, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shelby, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weir, Reed Hinckley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Top, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slade, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Leona Kingas, Keegan Ray, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ranwa, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Pluto, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hull, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Carl McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Niccolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.